Cool. Let's get started. So today we're going to be doing something slightly different. Sandarya is going to be sharing the screen and controlling the verses. So that way we can stop sharing when we don't need to. Okay, so let's start by doing the first chant. Cool. So whoever wants can join. If not, you can just listen. Om Asato Ma Satgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Shanti 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 Om. Jai Guru. All right, so this is the morning Shanti mantra, which is done right before class or anything important that we want to do in life. Hopefully, this class sort of is helpful in moving from untruth to truth, because that is where we want to head. Okay, so we are towards the end of our third chapter, and the last class was a place where we stopped, I think, on the 37th verse. And essentially what we were talking about was how we should act, and we should do our own duty, and we shouldn't do someone else's duty. Sorry, 36, I think so. No, 35, sorry. Yeah. Yeah, so we should be doing our own duty. We should not be attempting to do somebody else's duty, because, when we do our own, duty or, works which align with our own nature, our mind is more focused on the work. Because if we're doing things that we are not aligned to, we will always be thinking about, I should be doing something else. So better to do things that align with our nature, so that we are not building additional bonds and additional desires, because soon we will learn that desires is what is the problem. And certain kinds of desires, not all desires, obviously, certain kinds of desires are impediments to liberation, but not all desires. So please don't get confused and think that, oh, I should give up all my desires. But we will sort of go through the process of understanding that. So any questions about what we did last week? Anything came up for anybody? Okay, so let's get into our scripture. So we will do verse 36. All right, so now that Krishna has said all of those things, we're going to now listen to what Arjuna has to say. So would anyone want to do the Sanskrit today? If not, I can do it. Okay, would anyone like to do the English? It's easier. No English volunteers? Okay, I'll do the English too. Cool, so verse 35. Okay. Shreyan swadharma vigunaha paradharmat swanushtitat swadharme nidhanam shreya paradharmo bhayavaha. Better. Oh, sorry, I did the wrong one. Sorry, I need to do 36. My bad. Arjuna uvacha atha kena prayuktoyam papam chatirati purushaha anichhanapi vanyer baladiv niyojitaha. So Arjuna said, but impelled by what does a person commit sin, though against their wishes, O Varshaneya, constrained as it were by force. So now, the question that Arjuna has after Krishna has said, you should be doing work that is good for you, that is aligned with your nature, things that lead you towards liberation. But then, our essential experience is that, even though we have an intellectual understanding of like, yes, I should be doing things which are, aligned with my nature, and, but I seem to do things which are against it. Right. And we all have that experience. Like we may know what we like, but we tend to choose something else. Right. We do, maybe our jobs are chosen for a different reason. And we essentially, it's like contradictions all the time, even though we know what to do sometimes, but we end up doing something else. So an example is like, we want to like become fit or something and want to go work out, but then we eat crappy food, which we know in the back of our mind is in opposition to our other desire, which is I want to be fit and healthy. So there's always these sort of forces that are driving us and impelling us to do actions which are not aligned with what we really want to do and what is our essential nature. And Arjuna's question is like, why do we keep doing this? What is going on? And it's against my own wish, because I have a desire to do one thing and I'm doing something else. So it's almost like a sin here. So there's a word which is sin, which is actually a very, like, English doesn't have a good word for it. So the word is papam in Sanskrit, and sin doesn't necessarily mean morally good or bad. It's not about doing good and doing, evil or something, right? So it's more about what are actions that will free me, and what are actions that bind me. Or another way to put it is, what are actions that makes my mind a little bit more quiet, and what are actions that agitate my mind. So that's a way to look at whether something is good for you or something is bad for you. Actions which are, which dissolve thoughts or makes it, oh, 1 second, I got a message from Soundarya saying my mic is not connected. Okay, let me just check. Can anyone hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. I can hear you.
It looks like my other mic.
I can hear you too.
No, we can hear you. I just think it's the laptop mic.
We can hear.
Okay. No, I'm using the external mic.
Okay, fine.
Okay. So basically, like, why? Like, why do we do things against our nature? And here we're going to get an answer from Krishna. Any thoughts about this? Okay.
Because of pressure of the society?
Good question. Let us see what Krishna says. A good answer, but yes, partially yes. So let's do verse 37. Okay. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Kama Esha Krodha Esha Rajo Guna Samudbhavaha Mahashano Mahapapna Vidyin Miha Vairinam. So it is, the Blessed Lord said, it is desire, it is anger born of the active, all devouring, all sinful. Know this as the foe here in this world. So the answer to that is desire. And desire here doesn't mean I want to go pee, or I want to get a drink, or like I want to eat some food. Desire here is more the insistent kind, where I need to do this because otherwise I won't be happy. Are sort of, if I don't have it, I'm miserable. Those kinds of desires. Because what do those desires do in the end? Those desires essentially distract us and like put our attention on the external, thinking that it is out there, that where true happiness is, and it's out there where, I'm going to get fame, or I'm going to get whatever our egoistic sort of ideas that we have and that we've absorbed over, our upbringing and this life that we have lived. Those are the sort of desires that we will have. Everybody has unique desires in that way. And so, let's say it's wanting a lot of money, or wanting to approve people, or wanting to look good. All these are sort of desires that we have. And if they're very strong, we are going to invest a lot of our attention and energy on fulfilling those desires. And what we're going to learn is that because our attention is over there, it is not here, which is where it, truly bliss is. So because our attention is always on the external, we miss it. And we think fixing the external is what is going to solve my problems. And these desires are constant. The more desires we fulfill, the more desires we end up having. It's never that we have fulfilled a desire and now we are done. It's never like that. If you look at our own experience, we get to a certain stage in life where we feel pretty successful, but then we want something even more. So it's always this ceiling which is being pushed, right? Or raised rather. So this desire is endless. That is this human potential and human aspirations that we have, which is endless aspirations. The problem is, there's nothing wrong with aspiring to do something. The problem is if we attach our entire life's happiness to the fulfillment of the aspiration, then that is a problem for you and for me, because then I will be completely miserable when that doesn't happen. So is there a way to still have aspirations, but do it lightly, but like do it in a way that frees us rather than binds us? So yeah, society has a role to play with the way we think, but in the end, it is my own individual perception of how I look at my desires. Are they super insistent, or are they just something I have and I want to fulfill? And some desires, like we learned in the past, they are very strong. We just cannot drop them and say, I don't want to do it. We have to go through with them. So how do we go through them that we can sort of lessen the pressure that they have, so that they're not as insistent as they usually are? Any thoughts about this? Cool. So we will continue down this trajectory of desire. Next verse. Dhume navriyate vidvahni yathadarsho malena cha yathol benavrito garbha tatha tene datmavritam. So as fire is enveloped by smoke, as a mirror by dust, as an embryo by the womb, so this wisdom is enveloped by that desire or anger. So here we're given reasons as to why we have this, or I guess, why does this wisdom that bliss is here? It's not like, what we are looking for is right here. It's not somewhere there. And that's sort of the consequence of doing this work, or this realization that it was always here. It was, I kept looking for it outside. I kept trying to find it in different ways. But eventually we all come home, like there's a saying in some Buddhist teachings, so like you come home. Right? What does that mean? It means come here, because home is right here. But our misunderstanding rather, is that it's always somewhere outside. So finding the perfect partner, finding the perfect job, finding the perfect friends, finding the perfect community, all these things which are externally motivated. And nothing wrong with doing that, but it's like we get those things, but yet there's something lacking, right? We still don't have fulfillment. So why? Is because, so there's, and there is this wisdom that, if it is right here, if we all end up right here, why cannot I see it right now? Right? That's a good question that we have, which in things like, it's right here, but I don't see it. So what is the cause? It's desire. And it's the analogy we use is like, when you have a fire, it has smoke around it. And the smoke is sort of like this fog or a mist that covers what is underneath it. So the example of the fire is that the smoke doesn't really hide the fire. It's, it reduces the intensity of it. So I think the analogy here is that there's like the three states of mind that we have. So we have, the sattva state and the rajas state and the tamas state. So the clearest state of mind is sattva, where we are clear about who we are. So that's kind of the analogy, is like the fire and the smoke, where very little is hidden about my self nature. I know who I am. It's very clear. I am not, when I'm, a desire is coming up, I'm going for it because I know that this desire is strong and I have to go through with it. It's not my desire. Happiness doesn't, I have this entire understanding that happiness doesn't exist. Even if the desire comes true, it's not the object, it is me. All of that is very clear. And that's my experience while I'm fulfilling my desire. And that state is the sattva state. And, even though I'm involved and active, there's a very thin sort of veil over my self nature. So the analogy is kind of like the smoke in the fire. So you can still see the fire, it's just that maybe the intensity is slightly lesser. So now a second analogy is mirror by dust, where, a clean mirror reflects completely, but if there's a lot of dust in it, then I can't see it. And the dust here is, my desires that I have. And this is like the rajasic state, where I no longer can perceive that it's a mirror. It's now just like a dirty wall, right? So in my rajasic state of mind, I have, I want to get that promotion. I want to, make that deal, or I want to like impress my mom or dad or whatever, right? All of those are rajasic desires. And in that, I basically attach joy-giving properties to my desire. And because of that, I'm deluded, because I don't realize that joy is right here to start with. It's just that I'm using the desire to experience joy. But in my rajasic state of mind, in my delusion, I give joy-giving properties to the object. And then when that thing comes true, I feel very happy. And when that thing doesn't come true, I feel unhappy. And because I feel unhappy, now my mind's craving for that desire increases even more. So now I give more and more effort in trying to fulfill the desire. So it's a sort of vicious cycle where I build these bonds and deep desires because I have a misunderstanding of what desires are to begin with. And then the last analogy is like, the embryo in the womb, where, you can't really see the embryo at all if it's in the womb, unless you have like a sonography or something. But anyway, that's not the point of this verse. But the idea is that, it's so hidden that you can't really see it. And that's the tamasic state of mind, where when we are in a tamasic state of mind, we are completely deluded, where we are like, we don't even want to do anything. We don't even want to deal with our suffering. We just want to check out. So we want to numb ourselves. We either want to sleep, or we want to like Netflix, or whatever it is, the way we use to check out. That's, even more delusion, because we are not seeing what the problem is. We're not seeing that there is a desire within us that's preventing us from actually perceiving our own nature. And this, feeling of the fogginess that we have when we are feeling sad or depressed, all of that is basically a cloud. And we think that, some past issue or something, for whatever reason that we are depressed about, we think that is real. And that's preventing us from seeing our own self-nature. Our attention is too much on that and not here. So all of these are the sort of different analogies to explain that. Any thoughts about this?
I have a question. So once we know this,
Mm-hmm.
why is it still so difficult to, be cognizant of our desires?
Because we are still acting in the same way. We need to change the way we act, and that's going to be chapter 4. You're right on track. Now we're learning the process, and now we're going to learn how to act.
Got it.
Now we're going to learn on how to deal with our desires. Right now, the way we deal with our desire is desire comes up, we try to fulfill it. It either works or it doesn't work. And if it works, we want to, and if it feels really good, we want more of it. So now we'll strive even more to get it. If it doesn't work, we feel really shitty and we may want to further pursue it, but we will feel shitty the whole time until we get another taste of it. Maybe, so an example could be a promotion at work. We're all struggling to get that promotion. Once in a year, maybe you get a promotion, but the whole 9 months, we're struggling to get that promotion. And then let's say next year you don't get the promotion. Now again, you're like miserable because, the taste of getting the promotion was so good the previous year. We want more of it. So the cycle keeps going. So we will learn on like how to break that cycle. But first, I think the understanding of like, okay, desires, I have these desires and these desires are the cause of my misery. If that is clear, then we can come to like how to deal with the desires that I have in this moment. And everybody will have different desires, right? But the process is the same, which is desire. It's called, I don't think we've talked about it in this class, but essentially it's a vasana, which is an egoistic impression that we accumulate being, operating in this world. And this egoistic impressions, we accumulate impression by impression all the time. And these egoistic impressions become stronger and stronger and stronger and become these deep desires that we have. And now when we have this flip of a switch, which is, I know how desires come into me, and then new desires which I have will not have the same intensity and will not build up. We won't be building more bonds. So that's step one, which is stop building more bonds. And then step two is like, okay, the bonds that I have already, how do I deal with that? And we will get to that. Good question.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or thoughts? Cool. Okay, let's do the next one.
Wait, you missed 39.
I did, yeah. So I've skipped a couple of verses. Yeah. It's the same verse,
Okay.
same idea at least. All right. So verse 40. Indriyani manor buddhir syadhinashta muchyate etair vimoha yat yesha jnanam avritya dehinam. The senses, the mind, and the intellect are said to be its seat. Through these, it dilutes the embodied by veiling his wisdom. So we are talking about desire, and we're talking about what it is and how it comes about and all of that, and what does it do to us. So desire essentially puts our attention on the desire. Right? So if I have a really strong desire that I must eat chocolate cake right now, our entire attention is on the chocolate cake. Right? Do you see that? Like we have this innate capacity in the mind to be able to focus on things. So I can focus on my breath. I can focus on a memory. I can focus on an idea. So everybody, do the math problem like 5 times 5. So, it's 25. So I can do that. Or, you can think of what did I eat for, what was the last meal I ate? So you can think of that. So I can think of memories in the past. I can think of like, what do I want to do on Wednesday morning? If I have a chore or something, you can do all these things. And our attention is always, going from point to point. And it's always on one thing at a time. If you really think about it, we talk about multitasking, but our mind is actually single pointed at a given moment in time. We can always only do one thing. Our mind kind of like falls apart if we do more than like 3 or 4 things at the same time. So for example, try to pay attention to your breath and try to pay attention to the sensation in the back of your chair and try to like, feel the waistband of your pants that you're wearing. Try to do all of those things at the same time. It's kind of impossible. And your mind will kind of just stop. And so our attention is usually mostly on 1 or 2 things. And if a desire is very strong, our entire attention is on fulfilling the desire. And then that's the force that we talk about, because the force of the desire is so strong that it's very hard to bring the attention back to something else. So just like now, when we don't really, I hope we don't have strong desires right now, but it's very easy to sort of move our attention. I can say, okay, move it to my leg. I can feel my leg, move it to my breath. I can feel my breath. So it's very easy to move it when your mind is kind of, in a little bit in control. But let's say there's a strong desire in my mind. The force of it is just so strong that I just completely forget that I can do this. I have this capacity to focus on things and move away. But, so that's the whole process of like, how do I get control of my mind, in the sense where even if there's a strong desire coming in, I can acknowledge it, I can deal with it. And if it comes true, very good. If it doesn't come true, I can bring my attention back to something else, because something else is always available. It's just that we forget. We think that the desire is the entirety of our experience, and that we must get that thing done. So, so this verse is essentially saying, we essentially get information from our senses. So, so let's say how our desires even built up. So something external goes by. So let's say, we are single looking for a partner, somebody walks by, you're just like, wow, I need to go talk to that person, get their number or something. So that's like one desire that comes up through our senses, like external stimuli, right? Second desire is the mind itself. So the mind can come up with ideas or like think about memories. Suddenly you're feeling shitty. You're just like, oh man, I want to, eat pizza. Cheese board pizza is a really cool pizza place in Berkeley, if anyone hasn't been there and who's in the Bay Area. But, pizza, you kind of think of pizza. So you want to, so like memories come up and you kind of think about stuff from the past. So you want to experience that right now. So like the mind essentially is also like a mechanism through which desires are formed. And then the intellect is also part of it. And the intellect is something that evaluates and says, okay, is it available right now? Is it not available? How much effort should I take? So that's also sort of engaged in the desire formation. So all of these things are the cause of why desires come up. And because of these desires, our attention go to the desires. And just like our focus can be shifted, but because the desire is so strong, we forget that, the desire is just another object in my experience, and that I can focus on another object. But, depending on how strong the desire is or how uncomfortable the feeling is. So, all of those things are essentially the same manifestation of desires. Our focus becomes too much on either the sensation in the body, or the idea in our heads, all of those things. And we get veiled. Our wisdom gets veiled. So Ramya, so the question is like, so this is like why. We are understanding the process of why. So we want to start to get more conscious. So when our wisdom fails, how much time do we take to realize that, oh my God, I was completely zapped by this desire that I had, right? So we need to start noticing that, wow, it's almost like a dream, right? So like you imagine like you're awake and then you go to sleep and you have this vivid dream that you're in this, Harry Potter world and you're playing with Dumbledore, whatever. Something is happening and then you were so involved with the dream and you suddenly wake up and you're like, wow, I just had this crazy dream. And while I was experiencing it, it was so real. Same way, not saying that it is a dream, but in the same way, a desire comes up and we get so zapped by it and we forget everything else. Like, forget that we have this human body, we forget all about that, but we're just so involved in the desire itself that we forget that we have this capacity to come out and experience other things too. So start to notice that that's what is happening. And once we start to notice that, then we can start to play with it and we can morph it. So that is what needs to be done, which is we need to start paying attention, building our ability to notice stuff. And which is why like single pointed attention is very good, because when we're doing that, we are essentially building our muscle of not paying attention to random stuff around us and getting distracted. So we need to keep trying to do that. Any thoughts about that?
Lots of thoughts, Puneet. Now,
Yes,
I
please.
just, the two questions, one partly related to this verse and one partly not related, in case you don't mind diverting a little bit.
Sure.
But how do we delineate intellect from wisdom? That is one question. And the other one is the concept which you introduced to me in the second session itself. I've been wanting to ask you, is that this concept of the soul. I always thought, my soul and my mind is the same, So how do it's a little tough for me to digest or feel that, my mind and soul are acting differently, different from each other. So if you can kind of clear the smoke around here.
Sure. So I don't know which. So I never said soul to begin with. I think you said soul. I said the source of who you are.
No. The soul and mind thing is two classes back when you were having this meditation, and
Right. I'm just like trying to understand when I said soul. I don't think I ever said soul. What I may have said is the source of who you are. Like who you are is usually what I usually say. I never say soul because I think soul has a lot of, I think, like different understandings because of like cultural associations of the word. So like I don't like the word soul. So I did not say soul for sure. But maybe what you have understood as soul, which is essentially the source of who we all are, and that's where we are trying to have a glimpse of. So now your question is how is that like how can the mind and the source be different, right? Like that's your question.
Yes, and intellect and wisdom. I mean, say, doesn't intellect have? I mean, say your intellect is a part of your wisdom.
So
in this verse,
yeah. So there's two questions. So let's do the intellect versus wisdom. So in yoga, we basically say the mind is divided into many parts. Generally speaking, there's like four main ones. So there's there's ahankara, which is the Sanskrit, and which literally translates to I do, or I work, or I, so aham and kara, with those are the two words. So I and do stuff. So I do stuff. So the sense, and with English, we get this word ego, but it's not really a good word because ego again has a lot of weird implications, and psychology translates in very different ways. But essentially, it's this feeling that I am doing stuff. It's a feeling. Right? Sometimes we have a feeling that I am so great or I am so special. Sometimes we don't, because we're not even thinking about it. So it's an event that gets generated moment to moment, and depending on the moment, like if you're very triggered because somebody said you're an asshole, or said something crazy to you, we get very triggered because in that moment the ego has like suddenly gotten some activation, right? So or the ahankara has gotten activation. So that's one aspect of the mind. And there's another aspect which is this intellect, which is the ability to like reflect, and ability to essentially kind of ruminate over something, or the ability to like say this was in the past. So like for example, if you do the math, the mental computation 5 times 5, that's your intellect working, which is it has this ability to like compute and do things. That's also a function of the mind. So for example, somebody says, hey, here, have some heroin. Your intellect will come in and be like, okay, if I do heroin, I will probably get addicted, so no thank you. Or like my life is going to go to shit, so no thank you. So that's like the intellect coming in and trying to perceive this world and make a judgment. So intellect is always sort of judging and sort of trying to use memory and like ideas that we have had and some intelligence to form an opinion. That's the intellect. These are all functions of the mind. And So wisdom, on the other hand, is essentially a consequence. So wisdom is it's like the atmosphere in a way. It's always there in the background. It's just that we don't see it, right? So it's like, for example, something is, let's say, like what is a good analogy here? So I guess the word we are using for wisdom, what is the word here that we used? So jnanam. So jnanam is actually the word that we've used, and jnanam is essentially knowledge. So knowledge of what? We are always concerned with only one kind of knowledge in entire spirituality. Knowledge of who we are. That's it. Everything else is like dross, or like, like all of like, yoga, asana, and like, chanting and like prayer. All these things are externally stuff, but they're all sort of leading to self-knowledge. Because what is the problem is that we have a delusion. We don't know. We think we are somebody else. We think we are this body. We think we are this mind. So your question of like, what's the distinction between the mind and me? I thought I was me. That is the delusion, which is, I think I am just my mind. Even though we do have an experience of the mind, we have an experience that I can think. I have thoughts. I have memories. I have desires. I have all of these things, but these are all functions of the mind. And they are certainly a part of our experience, but they are not the only thing. So what this work is saying, start to see that they are not the only thing. There are other things that exist. It's just that our attention has always been on the mind. It has never been on something else. So what is it? Is there something beyond the mind? And then the answer is yes, there is. And how do we get there? We have to turn the volume level of the mind down. It's because the mind is so loud. Of course, nothing else other than the mind exists, because our attention is only on the loud mind. If we can turn the volume level of the mind down, we can start to see that, oh, there's actually a bunch of other stuff here. And it's always been there. It's just that the volume of the mind was just too much for me to perceive it. So that's the process that we're going through, which is, how do I turn the volume level down? How do I turn the volume level down? And the practice we are given now is single-pointed attention. Because we are focused on only one thing, we're not thinking of 10 other things that we want to do. We're only thinking of one thing. We're only thinking of one thing. And when that starts to happen, the volume level starts to go down. And when the volume level starts to go down, we start to notice that there's been this source, or this presence, the sense of awareness that's always there. And that's the one that is shining, 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 illumining this world. And that's where we want to, and that's what is released, or that's what we have a glimpse of when desires are satisfied. So we all feel great when desires are satisfied, right? We all have that experience. I want something, I want it, I want it, I want it. And when I do get it, wow, what an amazing few when I get the object. In those moments, this awareness is released. Because what happens is, when desires are satisfied, the mind stops. The mind literally stops functioning. Just that, again, we haven't paid attention to it. So we need to start paying attention. Start paying attention to both when we are miserable and when we are extremely blissed out. Both those situations. So there is a difference between mind and the source, not the soul, source of who we are.
Cool. Thank you, Puneet.
Did that answer both your questions? So the question of wisdom and
kind of. I need to reflect more about it.
Cool. Yeah. So this is a hypothesis. Don't believe anything I say. This is all a hypothesis. Find out for yourself, because this is like the atmosphere, right? Like, it exists. It's just that we don't pay attention to it. So find out. Turn your attention inwards, like, see if there is something beyond your mind. And the thing is, you're never going to see yourself as an object. is just like trying to see your own eyes, or trying to hear your own ears, or like you're trying to taste your own tongue. You can never do that. It's an instrument through which we taste, or like a tongue is an instrument through which we taste. Eye is an instrument through which we see. So we can never see our own eyes, right? We can see a reflection of it. Like somebody can take a picture and say, this is what it looks like. You can do all of that, but I can never see my own eyes. Similarly, I can never see my own real self, because eye is through which awareing happens. It's not like I have awareness, and there's an external thing. I am awareness. So awareness is never going to illumine some separate awareness, right? It's like awareness is awareness. And in this awareness, I have an experience of this world, external world. I have an experience of my inner world. I have an experience of my body, all of those things. So all we have to do is we have to just quieten our mind. And that's the only process. And mind here is essentially just crazy desires that we have, because those are what keeps my mind active in the end. Desires. And that's why that's what we spoke about in the last couple of verses, which is desire is the cause for this veil on this awareness, because my attention is always on the desire. Cool, great question.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you so much, Puneet.
Of course. Any other thoughts? If not, we can do the next one. All right, so what is the solution? One first solution here. Okay. Tasmat tvam indriyan yaidau niyamya bharatarshaba papamanam prajahidye hinam jnana vijnana nashanam. Therefore, O best of Bharatas, controlling first the senses, kill this sinful thing, the destroyer of knowledge and wisdom. So if desire is the problem, what do we do? So, so control of the senses, which is essentially a practice that is prescribed, which doesn't mean that we have to become numb. It's more about, input is coming in. So like, we are perceiving our world through the five senses that we have, eyes, nose, ears, mouth, and touch. So we are perceiving all of it. But, what is our current experience today is that we have our intellect sort of look at everything and like start to make judgments about everything, everything that we are perceiving. So instead, what we can try to do is we can use our intellect to not to ignore our judgments. So for example, somebody walks by and then you look at them, you're like, whoa, what an amazing, beautiful woman, or like a handsome man. That is our sort of senses giving us that information, and our intellect is reflecting on it. And our desire we may have a desire to go and talk to them, right? Like that's our natural instinct. So what we are saying is that we can be aware of that our natural tendency, and we have this desire, and then we can say, I will not do it. So what we are doing is we're trying to keep our attention and our energy within ourselves. Our energy is always trying to reach out and like jump and like do other things and like, immediately be responsive to our desires. A desire comes and you're like, need to fulfill. But instead, we can try to just step back and see, okay, I'm going to try not to fulfill this desire. So that's like trying to control the senses. And this is a practice. This is not a way of life. So this is a practice until we get to the next stage. And we're going to talk about that later. But this is a practice that we must try to do. It's not like we are trying to like make our lives small and say, I don't want to have any desires because all desires are no evil. No, we're just trying to get a little bit more in control of our minds, because the problem is in the mind. The self has no problem. The awareness that we are has no problem. It is indiscriminately illumining everything equally. The problem is in the mind, because the mind has this ignorance and this confusion about who we are, what we are, why we have these desires, all of that. And so that's where the liberation happens, in the mind. So the practice is here to control senses. And because senses is the first gateway through which we get input, which forms desire. The whole idea is that we want to start limiting the desires that we have, and senses is the first gateway. So if we can control it right from the senses, then it won't sort of, go into the next level, which is the mind, and the next level, which is the intellect. So we can remove senses right there, which is great. Which is why, practice like single pointed attention, a practice like meditation, those are prescribed, because what we are doing is we are limiting our sense doors. If we are only paying attention to the task in front of me, my ears are not listening to stuff around me. My mind is not thinking about the past. My eyes are looking only at the thing that I need to do. So we are naturally controlling our senses. And here, senses doesn't mean that, we have to go to a cave and just sit in a cave for like a year. No, we're just trying to say, okay, how can we stop paying it, not closing some of our senses which are not needed. So when I'm writing something, I don't need to keep looking at like what people are doing in front of me, right? I need to only write and think about what I'm writing. So single pointed attention. And this is a practice that we develop. So that way we are not distracted. If you're feeling cold, we just don't always are not sort of like trying to respond to like these physical sensations we're getting. We want to try to build some resistance and some stability to not react so much. We want to change that reactionary pattern that we have observed, where we want to satisfy all of our needs. So that's one of the practices. Any thoughts about this?
Yeah, I have one. Isn't it sometimes through senses that we can live in the now?
Yes, there's nothing wrong with sensory input, but I think this is a practice to get out of the frame of mind to believe that everything that the senses is reporting is true. Senses are a very bad reporter of things. It often overestimates or underestimates things. So we're trying to first control it so we can get a glimpse of something beyond it. So there is something beyond the senses, and there is something beyond the mind, there is something beyond the intellect. And we can only get a glimpse of that if we can reduce the volume of stuff that the mind is paying attention to. And the mind pays attention to stuff through the senses, if you think about it. I mean, through the senses, one, but then also like internally through memories and stuff. But the first door is the physical sense. So if we can try to control that, then, we can start to develop this sense of paying attention to something beyond.
Okay, thank you.
But our entire experience of this world is through the senses. So the senses and the body and the mind is really not a problem in the end. The problem is in the mind, specifically in understanding what this world is and who we are. And the lack of understanding causes all sorts of weird ideas that we believe. And this ignorance is what we want to fix. It's called self-knowledge, right? So there's the knowledge that we want to get, and not some intellectual understanding only. We want to get a direct experience of who I am. And that can only happen if my inputs, which is confusing me, lessens to some degree. So the problem right now is I believe that I am something that I'm not. And I believe that because my senses are reporting a bunch of stuff. And whatever my senses are reporting, I take that to be true. So I take that this world exists, and I have, however my worldview is, I take my entire worldview to be true. I take my entire personality to be me. all of those things. And that is certainly an experience, because, our senses give us those that information, our mind reflects on that information, and then some ideas come up. And that's happening all the time, moment to moment. And that is our life. Now, and most people live life this way, that in their entire world, they have never chosen to examine, is that all there is? Now we can live like that, and there's no problem. If you want to live like that, that's completely fine. If we want to go beyond it, if that is a desire that we have, then we have to start to pay attention and see, is the senses really, is it really it? Is the senses really it? If not, how do we go beyond it? So the process right now is to control. Because only if we lessen the volume of it, will our attention go to something beyond the senses. It's like, we're trying to, we are in a swimming pool, and, we are trying to, let's say somebody dropped their watch in the swimming pool. If everyone is moving all the time and the water is shimmering, we're never going to see the bottom of the swimming pool, right? And we want to find the watch. So what do we have to do? We have to say, everyone, stop moving. And, everyone stays still. And when everyone stays still, the water eventually stops moving. And then you're like, there's the watch. And then there you can pick it up. But until that happens, you're never going to see the watch. So that's the same process, where we have to stop here, stop moving here means like stop, our mind jumping from one sense to the other sense. So stop that first. And once that happens, and if we can be in that state for some amount of time, naturally you will see the watch. No effort has to be made, because that is who we are. It's just that we have not really been able to see that. Does that answer your question, Becca?
Yes, absolutely. Your analogies are always the best.
Thank you. Not my analogies. It's all in this book. So cool. So any other questions? Okay, let's do the next verse. Indriyani paranyahu indriyebhya param manaha manastu para buddhir buddhai paratstu sahaha. They say that the senses are superior to the body. Superior to the senses is the mind. Superior to the mind is the intellect. One who is even superior to the intellect is he or she, the Atman. Cool. So here, I was kind of like talking about like what is the, there's different levels through which desires are formed. So the outermost level is the physical, which is the physical world. And that's how we sort of, that's the physical world, information of the physical world comes through our senses, right? And then we have this model of like, okay, this is a wall, this is a tree, all of those things, right? So that's the external world. Now, there are desires in the physical world that we can sort of have, which is if I look at a car and I'm like, wow, I want that car. So that's an external desire that has manifested. We can control that external desire by controlling our senses, right? So if we cannot pay attention to stuff that we are seeing all the time, then the input for, wanting the car would not even come up, right? So if we were just, let's say we were walking and we were only paying attention to walking, and now a Tesla goes by or like a Maserati goes by, or whatever car goes by, no desire has even come in, because we have used our senses and we have controlled our senses to not even notice that there was a car, right? So the idea of the desire couldn't even have entered your mind. So that's, so they're saying that the senses are superior to the external world, because using the senses, you can sort of control, by controlling the senses, you can, block those desires. And then superior to the senses is the mind. So now let's say we have some memory. So now you have blocked out the external world, but let's say you're thinking about, oh, I went to Hawaii last year, it was so good. Coronavirus is so shitty, I need a vacation, blah, 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 right? Like all of us are having that feeling. Now we can use our intellect to control the mind, which is a memory comes up in the mind, and then our intellect, we can use that our intellect and this this wisdom that we have now gained, that we want to block these desires or not give in to these desires. So we can use our intellect to say, nah, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to focus on what I'm doing right now. So so you can use the senses to control external desires. You can use the intellect to control the mental desires. So they are like two gateways that if we get a good grip on, we can start to sort of limit the impact of the desires that we have. So that's basically, the intellect. And then finally, what is beyond the intellect? There is something beyond the intellect. And, we want, some traditions call it the soul. I don't like the word soul. It's mostly like the source of who I am. It is me. And, many traditions translate it as God or whatever, but it's essentially you and I. So this feeling of I that we are having all the time. I am, I exist, I shine. We are constantly having that experience. We don't wake up, we don't wake up thinking we don't exist. That never happens. I always am, right? I'm always shining. I'm always awake. I'm always perceiving stuff. The question is, what am I perceiving, and who am I really? Am I just this body? Am I my family? Am I a part of this country or whatever? Like those are all limited ideas that we attach to our identity. But we never doubt that we exist, right? We never wake up thinking that I don't exist today. That never happens. So there is something beyond even the intellect, which is this I, which is shining all the time. There's no moment where when you're not you, essentially. So that's what we want to get to, but we want to use our intellect is like we live in this intellectual world. So intellect is given the most amount of importance. If you are performing intellectual tasks on a day-to-day, right? Like the Western education completely focuses on the intellect. And that's because the intellect is kind of very close to this Atman, or, so the Sanskrit word for describing the self is Atman, which is this inner being that we are. And the nature of this being, that it is aware, and it shines, and it illumines our entire world of experience. It gives power to the intellect, the mind, and the senses. Without the Atman, the body is not, it cannot, it's inert. Body is essentially inert. It's the Atman which shines through the body. So that's where we want to get to, and have a direct realization of the Atman without the influence of the mind and the influence of the inputs that the senses is giving in. Because when the inputs are coming in, our attention is always on the stuff that the inputs is giving. So, it could be the car that I'm seeing. It could be the house that is, beautiful house that I'm seeing, or like this vacation that I'm thinking about. All of those are inputs that is coming into my mind, and my attention is always there. So we want to get to a place where we can have a clear experience of the Atman. And the only way that can happen is the mind, the intellect, and the senses are gone. And this may not be an experience that we may have right now, because a lot of effort has to be spent to get to that place, but it is possible. We can get to a place where we can completely shut all the inputs, and we can have a pure experience of just the Atman. And when we have that, all doubts are gone, because we can own, like right now, we are imagining what it is like. And imagination is never the reality. So no point in imagining what it's like. We just need to keep working and keep on keeping on and doing these practices. And there will come a point when we will have a taste and a direct experience of the Atman. But that is the final goal. And this is the process that we're going to go through. Any thoughts about this? Let's do the next one. I think this is the last. Cool. Evam buddhai param buddhva sansthabhyatmana matmana jahi shatru mahabaho kamarupo dushasadam. Thus, knowing him who is superior to the intellect and restraining the self by the self, slay you, O mighty arm, the enemy in the form of desire, no doubt hard indeed to conquer. So this is a kind of convoluted English here, but so knowing him, here him is the Atman and it is you. So the self in me is the self in you, is the self in all. So once we know the self, and not the self as an external object, it is the self within us. Once we know the self, which is superior to the intellect, is because, you know, the self is what gives power to the intellect. And restraining the self by the self. So you notice that the first self is lowercase and the second self is capital case. So just like how we were restraining, you know, the external objects with the senses, restraining the senses with the mind and intellect. Similarly, we can restrain the intellect with the self, because the self is the background of it all. And, you know, so we're thinking of a hierarchy. So the self is right here on top, controlling, you know, the intellect, the mind, the senses, and the external world. So this is a layer of how we experience things. And the self is right up there and it controls everything. So once we have a taste of that, and once we can go there, you know, because it's always there. It's actually not even going anywhere. So it's more like noticing that it was there. Once you can notice that it's there, then everything drops, in the sense an idea can come in and I can look at it and I can say, do I want to do it? Do I don't want to do it? Okay, I'll do it. Or I can say I don't want to do it. So, you know, any desire, because we realize what desires are. They're just ideas, and there's nothing good or bad about any desire. It's just that every desire has consequences, and we should be okay with dealing with the consequences, or not. So, for example, if you want to get promoted and strive hard, go for it, but realize that there's consequences to that. Everything. You will have more responsibilities. Maybe you'll make a lot more money. You may have a lot less time. All of those things. But we will be able to look at each thing and see, is this what I really want to do? And, you know, when we talk about doing things aligned with our nature, we will only start to do things that we really want. And not because somebody else told me to do it, but because I want to do it. It's something that has no resistance. You know, some desires are like expressive, where I want to express myself. I want to and be creative, and those desires are what we want to really have, because they don't have any motivation, like a dirty motivation, or like they are pure in some way, where you just want to do it. You don't care about the outcome really. You just want to do it because it's so fun. And those are the kinds of things we want to start to do a lot more. And that's naturally going to start to happen, because we're going to realize that in the end, no desire is really special. And what you do is just determined by the experiences we've had in the past, who we are, like in the sense of, you know, where we have been brought up, all of the cultural context, all of that. That determines the kinds of desires we have. So once we realize that, then any desire can be conquered. But to get there requires a lot of practice, a lot of patience, a lot of compassion to our own minds, because we have built this habit over a long time, this habit of believing our minds and believing our desires, all of those things. We have built it over a long, long time by repetitive thinking. So the only way to be free from that is to start to push in an opposite direction, or in a direction that moves us away from our natural thinking. And that is a hard thing to do. And it's uncomfortable, and it's painful, all of those things. So it's going to require a lot of effort and energy, but it is possible. It is possible to get there. So that's the way we start, and we need to keep on keeping on. Any thoughts about this? Cool. So I think this ends this chapter. We have a last verse, which is the Upanishadic verse 44. Yeah. So every chapter has this nice ending verse. So Om Tat Siddhi Srimad Bhagavad Gita Supanishatsu Brahma Vidyayam Yoga Shastre Shri Krishna Arjun Samvade Karma Yogo Nama Tritiya Dhodhyayaha. Thus, in the Upanishads of the glorious Bhagavad Gita, in the science of the eternal, in the scripture of yoga, in the dialogue between Shri Krishna and Arjuna, the third discourse ends entitled Karma Yoga. All right, so we finished the third chapter, and we are going to do the fourth chapter next class. And just to give you a slight taste of what is to come, so we kind of spoke about like what is desire, what is action, how do we act, or we kind of alluded to like how we should act, trying to do stuff that's aligned, and how do we essentially not build more and more karma, essentially, or more and more bonds. How do we start to not build additional bonds? And now we're going to talk about explicitly how to like break the bonds that we have. So we have all of these desires. What do we do about it? And that's sort of what we're going to talk about in the fourth one. So it's like renouncing action through knowledge and through insight, because we have a lot of desires, and it's not easy to just give it up. So how do we act in a way that allows us to free ourselves? So we're going to continue along that journey. Cool. So we have about 20 minutes, and we can do a longer meditation this class. Any thoughts about what we did so far, this chapter? Okay. Cool. So let's do a meditation. So let's start by sitting in a comfortable position. And close your eyes, or you can leave it open. Sleepy or tired. Make sure your back, neck, and head are aligned and straight. I'm going to start by taking a few deep breaths. And on the exhale, see if you can release any tension you're holding and just relax. Take another breath. And on the exhale, see if you can relax a little more. Take another deep breath. And on the exhale, completely relax. So by paying attention to the breath, we have sort of automatically come to a position of just witnessing. We have this ability in our minds to just pay attention to things externally, pay attention to bodily sensations and activity, and pay attention to the activity of the mind, which is thoughts that are coming up. We are thinking about a memory, thinking about stuff you want to do in the future, or just imagining things, thinking about a problem you want to solve, whatever it is. We have this attentive faculty in us where you can focus on things. So we can focus on the breath, you can focus on a memory, so you can focus on your favorite flower, the flower that you've seen. You can focus on what you're going to eat next. So we can do this all the time, moving our attention to stuff. We can do it consciously. So, like we consciously can pay attention to the breath and consciously think about a problem we want to solve. So thinking about what is the capital of Denmark. Think about it. I think it's Copenhagen. So we're consciously doing it, or we can unconsciously pay attention to stuff as well. So if a memory is coming up and we start to roll in the story without realizing that we should be paying attention to the breath, for example, we have allowed the mind to take over. The desire of being involved in the memory is too strong, and it has veiled or covered the fact that we are in control, not the mind. So we want to start to develop this muscle of being able to focus on things when we want to and not being thrown into the theme of thinking or processing a memory or planning unconsciously. If you want to consciously think of a memory, that's fine. You want to stop unconsciously getting caught up. Notice how mind is always paying attention to stuff which is external. We have never thought of looking at what it is or who is it that is paying attention in the first place. Like we have this ability of illuminating images, thoughts, sensations, all of these things are coming up. But where is it coming up from? Or who is responsible for illuminating it? And the only way to really see that is if our attention on the stuff stops and we sort of turn our attention inwards. So in the gaps of one thought ending and next thought beginning, try to pay attention to where is the sense of attention? Where does awareness begin and where does it end? Is there a place where there is no awareness? It's kind of like the atmosphere. There's no place where there's no atmosphere. It's always there in the background. It's the context in which we are aware of our breath, aware of our thoughts, sensations. It feels like this empty sky of awareness. And it may feel like that, or it may not. But if it does, all the objects in it, like our thoughts, our feelings, they are momentary. They appear, they exist for a while, and then they dissipate. Where do they come from and where do they go? They just appear. And they exist for a certain amount of time and it dissipates again. Back into the background or into this awareness. So this awareness is the only thing that is constant in every situation. So being aware of a thought is the mind, essentially. Not being aware of a thought removes the mind for a moment. So the mind is essentially paying attention to thoughts. So the mind is a tool, a function that we can utilize to solve problems, to help experience and understand this world. But that's it, it's just a function. We can use it for a moment and then we can put it in our pockets and we're done. Easier said than done. But in meditation, for moments, if we start to have an experience where the mind, the volume of the mind is low, those moments are of deep, deep importance and have a profound impact on the psyche. those moments will start to become slightly longer, and then we will start to have confidence that indeed the mind is separate from me. And this is not an intellectual understanding, direct experience of it. So if your mind is lost in thinking about a memory or something, it's only because the desires that we have are very strong and they pull our attention in that direction. There is this force, and we need to just acknowledge that yes, there is this force. But just acknowledging it and being with that force is starting to break or rather loosen the force a little bit, or slow it down. You want to do this over and over again. bring your attention back to objective reality. When you're ready, you can open your eyes. Cool, so like every class, let's end it with a verse, which is a chant from Bhaja Govindam. Sandhya, if you can share the screen. Cool, so if you want, you can join or you can just listen as well. Yogarato va, bhogarato va, yogarato va, bhogarato va, sangarato va, sangavihina, sangarato va, sangavihina. Yasya brahmani ramate chitta, yasya brahmani ramate chitta, nandati 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 va, nandati 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 va. So English is the entire teaching of yoga and the purpose of yoga, to be able to revel in ourselves and realize that that's where bliss is and that's where enjoyment is. And once we can see that, we can enjoy wherever we go. So that's the objective and that's the goal, and I hope everyone can get there. Cool, so that was the end of this class. Thank you all for joining. I'm happy to stick around to answer any questions or anything like that. But that's it.
Thank you, Puneet. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Puneet.
Thanks.